What I'm specifically going to talk to you today about, though, more so than the external environment around COVID, is more about what our internal response has been around our employees and our workplace, and what we think that the future might look like. And to your earlier point, Jen, I don't think anybody knows exactly what that looks like and when that's all going to happen, but we've certainly got some plans in place for what that might look like into the future. So we might move on, Holly, if that's to the next slide. So one of the things that we looked at as part of, and you'll see the map that's on that slide, was where all of our employees lived. That was really critical for us to start to build up a bit of a view around things going forward. But what that really brought out, which is what I wanted to highlight today, is that we've got about 700 people that live in the Geelong area that work in WorkSafe. The building itself has about 850 employees, and there's still a few people that travel from Melbourne. So you can see there in that, you might not be able to see all that well, but the vast majority of people that work in our WorkSafe building do live in the Geelong region. And we're certainly really conscious of the role that we play in terms of the local economy and so on as well, around having people in the CBD and moving around and spending some money. We've also got 12 locations across the state, so we are obviously very focused on Geelong, but we also have responsibilities in a number of other areas across both regional areas, but also metro areas. So even that's produced some challenges for us when we've had to close some of our metro offices, and we've got people that have travelled between the metro and regional zones. That's something that's going to have to be managed for a period of time. Clearly, we've got two key initiatives in WorkSafe, which is reducing workplace harm and improving outcomes for injured workers. And that's really been critical for us to make sure that we continue to focus on those things, particularly as outbreaks started to occur around the second waves, predominantly in workplaces, and that created a really massive load for us as an organisation to manage, obviously in this time where everyone's working remotely. So if you move on to the next slide. So I do remember back in March, I'd been doing some, with our executive team, we've been doing some road shows in some of our regional areas. And I was actually stuck on the Western Ring Road coming back from a road show in Shepparton and Wangaratta. We've been speaking to some of our staff. I remember I was sitting there listening to the radio and hearing all of the crazy stuff that was going on at the time. And started to make some phone calls. I was still in my role at that point as the head of IT. And I started to make some phone calls and said, hey, I think we need to be starting to get ready for preparing the organisation to be fully working remotely. And once people had started to go, what the hell are you talking about? How on earth are we going to do that? We started to put some things in place around our business continuity planning. And it was fair to say that the business continuity plans for the organisation had never catered for the fact that the whole organisation would be working remotely. That was never part of the plan. There was part of the plan where we might have some critical functions who might need to work remotely, but not the whole organisation. So we had to really quickly increase a number of back-end infrastructure things to provide some capacity. We very quickly rolled out some new tools that we had in the wings, thankfully, but we hadn't quite rolled them out. So Microsoft Teams and Zoom. And for WorkSafe, we actually rolled out within about 3 weeks a brand new call centre functionality that allowed our advisory service in WorkSafe to be able to take calls from home. And that's something that had never been done either, because again, the business continuity plan was to go to another office and take calls from there. We had to also implement a whole range of new processes. As a result of that, obviously there was a lot of things that happened in the organisations that were very face-to-face, and probably the decision-making needed to be a lot more focused than what it had been. We needed to be in a much quicker routine about making decisions, focusing on what the key things were to be able to move forward really quickly. And probably one of the keys to that, which we learned very quickly, was around improving and streamlining our communication. So streamlining that communication to our staff and to our stakeholders was absolutely critical. And I think, and I'll talk a little bit more about communication in a minute, but I think that's probably one of the key things that we've really learned here is around how we communicate to people. And there's some results around that, which I'll talk about in our EOS survey, that have showed that we've actually probably got that right to an extent. So that's been really good. But the other thing we were really conscious of once we got out and we got everybody out and we said, okay, let's get everyone settled. And once we were confident that the technology was working and that people were up and running, was to then get back to normal as quickly as possible. So continuing on the normal executive meetings and the normal other meetings that happen, and connecting with people and all those sorts of things. So it didn't become something that was unique and different. We just got back into running the business, which was the core thing really quickly. So I'll just add a couple of things. Look, our WorkSafe ELT still meets daily, so we're still, as of from March, we started meeting daily to talk about things. We're still doing that today, so it's really interesting because as a result of some of those things, I think our ELT is more connected now than what it ever has been, because we're having those daily relationships and we're touching base on stuff. Sometimes the meetings go for 10 minutes, sometimes they go for 50 minutes. Just depends what's on the go at the time. And I think that's really actually brought a whole range of relationships together, and I've seen that across the whole organisation, not just the executive team, but a number of other teams are doing that. And the comment has been that the relationships to some extent have actually improved, which has been a really interesting outcome. So just on the next slide, so managing the remote working. So what did we actually do? So as I said before, the comms were really critical. So we still have, and again, as the ELT still meets every day, we still have an email that comes out from the chief executive every day. So he'll be talking about things that he's been working on, things that the organisation's been doing in response to COVID or just generally. And there's a bit of humour and a bit of light in that. Colin thinks it's humorous. I'm not sure that the rest of us do. Actually, this has been recorded, isn't it? So I better not say that. But it's been a bit of fun. So so that's also kept everybody really connected across the whole organisation. And what we've seen from that, which has been really interesting, is that from our last EOS survey to this EOS survey, our employee opinion survey that was done under the COVID banner, our visibility of our senior leaders has actually increased by 20%. So I think one of the things that we've learned from that is that visibility is not just about being visible and walking around the floors. It's actually about how you have genuine and meaningful conversations and connect with people. And so we've really learned a lot around what visibility actually looks like. And in fact, our senior leader communication in our EOS survey has improved by 12%. And our overall engagement has increased as well from 76% to 85%. So during this time where the organisation's been very disparate and you can have all sorts of reasons as to why you're not going to connect with people, we've seen our visibility and our communication and our engagement go up. And that's not necessarily an unusual thing, I think, in a number of other departments that I've spoken to as well. What we also saw, though, as part of that around managing remote work was that, particularly as the second wave broke out across a lot of workplaces, the volume and the work that came through WorkSafe just absolutely exploded. So not only were we managing this whole environment where we were working remotely, the actual work volumes, and I've got a couple of stats here, so our call volumes doubled as part of this second wave. So we were taking an extra 14,000 calls per month. And if you recall back, as I was talking about before, we had never actually run our call centre remotely before. We're now setting records for the amount of calls that are being taken by 14,000 a month and doing that remotely. Our email volumes tripled and our inspectors' notifications went up by 2.5 times. So there was some really incredible stuff that was happening. It was happening all really seamlessly, and the way that the organisation has just reacted and responded to people working from home, people homeschooling, people's dogs in the background, people's cats walking across the screen, all sorts of stuff that happens when you work remotely. That's all okay, and there's no problems with any of that, and people just get on with it and they're dealing with it, which has been absolutely fantastic. Probably the other key thing that's worth calling out as well is that we've kept the business running. So whilst we've been dealing with all of this stuff, we've actually been able to keep the business going. So we've tried as much as possible to continue a number of the projects that we had going on that probably would have been easy for us to go, you know what, let's just stop these projects. We wanted to continue doing the work. We want to continue keeping people employed. And we've been really focused on that as well. And in fact, over this time, since March, we've actually onboarded both permanent and temporary staff with 250 new people that we've onboarded over that time. So there's 250 people that have started in the organisation that have never actually set foot in the office. So they've had their devices couriered to them, they've been set up remotely, they're up and running in terms of their team environment, but they've actually never physically met their team. So that's also been a pretty incredible change that we've made during that time as well. If we just move on to the next one. We're also really conscious in WorkSafe about our role as an exemplar or as the regulator in this space. We know that a lot of what we do gets replicated across a number of other government organisations. People often say, well, if that's what WorkSafe are doing, then we'd better do the same thing, or that sort of sets the precedent. So we've been really conscious of what we've done in terms of our support for our employees during the process. We've set up a number of wellbeing programs. So we have mindfulness programs. We've got physical fitness programs. We've partnered with a local gym just down the road to provide online training programs for our staff via online apps. As I said, the mindfulness workshops. We've had a number of mental health seminars. We've had external experts come in and talk about mental health for our staff. Obviously got our EAP arrangements for people who are struggling, and we have seen a number of a real increase in the number of people accessing all of those programs, which has been really encouraging. But it also means that we've got a number of people who are struggling during the current circumstances, which is probably goes without saying to some extent. Provided a number of leave arrangements for our staff, so we've been really flexible around what leave we're allowing people to take, particularly around the remote learning. And if they've got people in their homes who are homeschooling or remote learning, then we've been able to accommodate that. And we've had people working part days. They might work in the morning, have the afternoon off to help with the kids and those sorts of things. So we've been really flexible about that. Our ergonomics setup's been really important. So we've got a program where we can do a virtual ergonomics setup with our employees. So they'll get an assessment done and get some recommendations as to what improvements they might need to make. We've got $250 reimbursement available for employees if they need to get a new chair or change something in their setup. Etiquette and routine has been really important, because what we saw with the ergonomic setups was what people actually needed to do to some extent was just get up and move. But if you're in back-to-back Zoom meetings all day, then that's pretty hard. So we've tried as much as we possibly can to set, if it's a half an hour meeting, make it 25 minutes, and if it's an hour meeting, make it 50 minutes. So you've got the ability to be able to get up and have a bit of a move around, because we think that's really important. The other thing that's been a real thing that we've put in place in real time as part of this, we've had our inspectors who are out in the front line going into workplaces that have got COVID outbreaks. So for us, one of the really important things has been to protect the health and safety of our inspectors, but also to provide them the right level of PPE protection. So we set up an online process for our inspectors to be able to get new or to be able to get the PPE. So that then gets distributed out of Malop Street. It'll get sent to their homes so they can access all the right equipment and PPE. We don't allow them to go out on site, obviously, if they don't have that PPE. So getting that set up. And since the start of August, we've distributed nearly 2,000 pieces of PPE to our inspectors in the front line to make sure that they're safe when they go out on site. So the next slide, Holly. So that then brings me to what we're doing in terms of planning for a return to the office. What we understand is that getting people back into the office is going to be a lot more difficult than it was actually getting out of the office. And I spoke a little bit about that and how much of a challenge that was. We actually think getting people back in is going to be harder. We've got logistics of lifts and meeting rooms and social distancing and all those sorts of things that we're going to need to manage. So there'll be, I think once we start to come back, there'll be a theoretical limit as to what you can have in the building, but there's probably also going to be a practical limit as well. So if they've got, if there's only 2 or 4 people allowed in a lift, for example, that means there's only a certain number of people that can get in the building at any one time. So there's going to be practicalities around what we can and can't do. We've also got people that catch public transport from Melbourne and that potentially, hopefully, fingers crossed for us here in the regions, if the numbers keep going the way they are, we could be on a very different setting to Melbourne. So that'll mean that our Melbourne people aren't going to be able to come to the office necessarily, or may not want to catch public transport. So at the moment, we haven't set any dates about what that looks like. We're obviously very aligned to the roadmap from the Chief Health Officer. But we're certainly getting to the point where we're going to be very prepared once we get the green light to be able to open the buildings in some capacity, that we'll start to have a process that people can book themselves in. So what that's likely to look like for us is that if I want to continue working from home because of the circumstances or because that's what I want to do, then that will be okay, and you'll be able to do that. But if we've got limited capacity in the building, say 100 or 200 people, we'll start getting people in via a booking system to be able to come into the office at the right time. So that's certainly what we're looking like in the short term. And I think that's going to set some precedences for us going on in the longer term as well. So if we probably, yeah, I think if we move to the next slide, Holly, it starts to talk a little bit about what the future might look like to an extent. So in the short term, we recognise obviously that the environment that we're working in is very unpredictable. So we know that's going to continue to change. So what we want to try and do is set some certainty for our employees, even in times of uncertainty. So setting up a really clear framework around what that will look like, and understanding that at various points in time, the local, the federal or state governments may impose some changes. There might be something happening at a very local level as well. So there may be some changes there. There may be something that's happening at an individual level. You may have somebody at your kid's school and the kids have got to stay home, or you might have come in close contact with somebody at the local bakery, and all those sorts of things. So we're going to have to be very adaptable for the next probably 12 months or so until there's at least a vaccine that's been found. So being able to set some principles for our staff without saying you will be in the office on these days, because we understand that those circumstances are going to change, is going to be really important for us as we go forward. And look, and I don't think, as I said, I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. So also thinking about so as I said before, we've got about 850 or so that's here in the Mallet Street office. If you think about the density limits around social distancing, that automatically reduces our limits down to about 400 people in the office. So until those density limits start to get lifted, which is potentially when there's a vaccine, means that we're not going to have a full contingent of people in that office for quite some time. So if we move forward to the next slide, some of the other things that we've learned through this is that, and I think this also goes to a little bit about the EOS results that I talked about before, with the really big increases that we've seen in our engagement and in our communication, in our leadership and so on, is that people have really lapped up the flexibility that's been offered. And I think that's part of the reason as to why we've seen such a large increase in some of these things. So we're seeing people who want to change their working hours to an extent where they can work more flexibly. And their working locations become a real important thing for them. And I see as we start to go forward that the office is not necessarily the be all and end all of how people work going forward. I think there'll be a real mixture. The office is absolutely going to be critical, and it will continue to be critical. People come to the office for connection. They come to the office for collaboration. What we would say is it's very easy to, well, not very easy, but it's possible to run the business while you're in this mode. It's very hard to change the business when you're in this mode. So changing the business requires a bit more face-to-face time. But I think there's an opportunity there that, depending on the type of work that you're doing, you might decide that I'm doing a certain type of work. I'm going to work from home today. I might need to come into the office for a couple of days because of another type of work I'm doing. So the office is, rather than being the central point, as I said before, and the one place that people come, it's going to be more of a case-by-case basis, I think, going forward. We certainly not backing away from the fact that the office is not going to exist. It absolutely will, and it'll absolutely be critical, and I don't see any major changes there. I think how people's relationship with the office changes will be critical. And will really change the way that we work going forward. I'm also aware that areas like, and I think there's opportunities here for Geelong too, because I think areas like the VPS are looking at the potential of having hub-based arrangements. So rather than having everybody go into the CBD for their work, they'll work out of maybe a local hub that's a little bit closer to where they live, and they could be across a number of multiple agencies. And I think it will be really critical part of Geelong as well, is that we may be able to even be in a position to have a local government hub where people locally can come and work out of the local Geelong office, which I think would be really important. And I see a similar way that other organisations will work going forward. Just moving through the next slide, so the now normal slide. So yeah, I think I've probably covered a lot of this in what I've spoken about. So I think what I'm effectively saying here is that we need to continue to be responsive and adaptable as we navigate the changes that are going to inevitably come. And I saw somebody just posted a comment there that so we may well be opened up earlier, but we also may then be shut down again at some point as well. We need to be able to adapt to that. So that's why I don't think having hard and fast rules about here's the date, here's when you're in the office, and it's these days is actually necessarily going to work for us. So if we move forward to the next slide, so things that we want to consider as we go forward in the future of work. So What we don't want to do, and what I've been really conscious of doing, is not making any decisions about changing the way that WorkSafe works in terms of the office, and then having unintended consequences on WorkSafe's culture and values in particular. Because the organisation's been built for the last 30 years on an office. So by changing that in 6 months can potentially have real impacts on the culture of the organisation and how stuff gets done. So, WorkSafe, and I can probably talk for TAC as well, Kylie, very relationship-based organisations. And get things done by who you know and the relationships that you create. Now, as I said before, we've had 250 people that have started in the organisation since March who have never physically met any of their colleagues. So that by default starts to then very much change the culture and the way that things get done in the organisation. So we need to be really conscious of that. I think our employees have called out in a number of surveys that we've done that they're looking for more flexibility in the way that they work. And I think this opportunity, now that we've proved that technology and things will work, and we've got the ability to be able to do that, will bring that to the fore even more. I am conscious, though, that we're all in this situation at the moment where everybody's working remotely. I think the situation where you've got 6 people in a meeting room and 3 people working remotely on video conference and trying to coordinate a meeting during those times, and that will be a very different experience to what we see now when everybody's remote. So if you think the 6 people in the meeting room will go off and maybe have a little side conversation after the meeting that the 3 people on video conference aren't part of, and then that starts to create a different dynamic. So I think there's still some complexity to work through once we get back into a more hybrid environment than what we've got now, where everybody's remote, which I think is probably a little bit easier to manage. The role of the office going forward, I've spoken about. How technology supports us, how we want to work, that's absolutely critical. We've got a bit of a concept which is that your device is your office effectively. Actually, I think that's on the next slide, Holly. So if you want to just go to the next slide. There's 3 key things that we see, which is obviously technology, and your device is a mobile office and meeting room. So really, your life in your office and your working environment doesn't revolve around the office, it revolves around your device. And that allows you to connect in and out as you need. We think the routines are really important. So continuing those routines that we talked about before, and having that flexible use of accommodation, taking into account social distancing, clean desks, that's going to be important for cleaning, for the ability for cleaners to get in and clean everything. And we think we'll move probably to more of a desk booking type system. So given the fact that not everybody's going to be in the office every day, that changes how we potentially come into the office. And I mentioned before about connection. So I think connection is vitally important. So too is the one that's probably not mentioned there, though, is capability. So there's also a capability uplift in terms of management around managing people in a remote working environment. We ran a survey with our senior leaders last week, and we said, do you feel capable of being able to run a remote team and workforce for a longer period of time? And I think about 85% of them said yes, which was really encouraging. But I am really conscious that managing a team in a remote working environment, managing outcomes, rather than the traditional, I can eyeball you and I can see you're at work, so I know that you're doing work, is a very different prospect and maybe requires some changes in terms of the capability of our leadership. Before Wave 2 came on, we saw something really interesting. So we were doing some recruitment before Wave 2 came. And what we were seeing was that people who we thought, well, this is great because there's people that live in Geelong who've got an opportunity to come and work for us now because they're not needing to travel to Melbourne, all those sorts of things. There was a little bit of a, well, I can still have a job in Melbourne, earn Melbourne wages, and I don't have to travel into the CBD as often. So where I was happy to maybe take a little bit of less money and work in the Geelong area, I'm maybe not quite so comfortable with that anymore because I maybe only need to go to Melbourne 2 or 3 days a week, and I can still continue to earn Melbourne wages. That's probably just a little bit of caution that we saw a little bit of that just before Wave 2 started as we were doing some recruitment. So I think there's absolutely positives and negatives in that. I think there's more positives than there are negatives, but yeah, the wage comparison was just one that came up as part of that. So hopefully that's given a bit of an overview as to all the stuff that's been going on and a little bit about what we think the future might look like. Fingers crossed, hopefully, that we get there at some stage soon.